Hello, welcome to EcoRap Podcast, which is a SciComm podcast related to conservation and wildlife sciences. I'm your host Kalpapran Patwari, and today we are going to talk about chimps. Well, why chimps? Well, that's because today is World Chimpanzee Day, or at least at the time of releasing this video, it is World Chimpanzee Day. And without much further ado, let's talk about chimps. Okay, so first let us discuss the taxonomy and the evolutionary context related to chimps. Chimpanzees belong to the order primates, the family Hominidae, which are the great apes that includes us, orangutans, gorillas, and of course chimps as well. And finally, chimps belong to the genus Pan. The genus Pan again contains two extant species, which are the common chimpanzee, whose scientific name is Pan troglodytes, and the bonobo, which is called Pan paniscus. Now, it is fairly common for people to misidentify bonobos as chimpanzees, especially given the very similar morphological appearances. However, bonobos are generally more slender and have longer legs and smaller heads, while chimpanzees are kind of stockier, more with a broader chest and a more pronounced brow ridges. Okay, now coming to the evolutionary aspect of chimps, molecular and genomic studies show that the last common ancestor of humans and Pan, which again includes both bonobos and chimpanzees, lived about 5 to 7 million years ago, and the chimps and bonobos diverged from each other. The clades diverged from each other roughly 1 to 2 million years ago. For example, genome comparisons indicate that the human lineage split from the chimp slash bonobo clade like 5 to 7 million years ago, while bonobos and common chimps split like 2 million years ago. Now, fossil evidences from early Pan-like ape is sparse, but late Miocene African fossils such as the Nakalipithecus, which existed roughly like 9 to 10 million years ago, which is way before humans and chimps split, suggests that early ape suggests that Nakalipithecus probably might be the early ape and is closely related to the ancestors of gorillas, chimps, and humans. Now, with modern molecular clock analyses calibrated with fossil, consistently date that the humans and chimps split at like 6 to 7 million years ago, which again aligns with these Miocene finds. Now, coming to the anatomy and the physiology and the morphology of chimps, adult chimpanzees are usually robust apes with modest sexual dimorphism. Wild male Pan troglodytes weigh roughly between 34 to 70 kilos, and females between 26 to 50 kilos. This kind of makes males on average like 1.2 to 1.3 times heavier than the females. And the standing height, which is like the erect position when they are kind of stood on both just two of their limbs, like the lower limbs, which are legs for us. The height ranges from about 1 to 1.7 meter. The skull, on the other hand, has a kind of a cranial capacity of roughly 320 to 480 cubic centimeter. To bring it in perspective, it is about 1/3 the size of an average human cranium. Therefore, this reflects a large kind of brain relative to most mammals, but then again smaller than us humans. Like chimps, like us humans, chimps also have 5 fingered hands with opposable thumbs, but their thumbs are relatively short and weak. compared to us. In Pan, the thumb metacarpal is kind of short, and the thumb itself is small and weak, and is relatively immobile compared to their elongated fingers. So their fingers are quite elongated, and the thumbs are quite short and stocky. So they don't have like proper use of it. Thus, kind of this entire hand anatomy of chimps reflects a trade-off, which is long curved fingers are useful for powerful arboreal grip and grasping, but then again it comes at the expense of a truly human-like precision grip. Like because of our thumbs, we can really be very precise on how we hold it, how we write, and all the different things we can do with, just because we have we have comparatively stronger thumbs and comparatively longer metacarpal. Anyway, now the overall body build is muscular, and chimpanzees typically walk on bent limbs, as when knuckle walking. So you have seen all those videos where they are like they put a lot of pressure on their knuckles. So these are our knuckles, so you can they are knuckle walking, and I'm not a better person to show it, but yeah, I'll put up a video for you just now. Okay, now coming back, they walk on bent limbs, and especially when they're knuckle walking, but can also confidently move in trees. And that doesn't mean that they're knuckle walking on trees. They can particularly grasp a particular branch and then walk more, even confidently move about confidently from trees to trees or on a tree. Coming to the neurology of chimpanzees. Chimpanzees usually have a larger brain for their body size, which is given, as we discussed, the greater cranial capacity, although smaller than human brains. Although their brains are smaller than us, the chimpanzee brain is highly complex and is largely similar in organization to humans. For reference, wild chimps typically weigh from about 40 to 50 kilos for males, and have a brain volume on the order of 400 cubic centimeter. In addition to that, the pan brain contains many of the same cortical areas as us humans, and in fact it even includes mirror neuron systems in the frontal and the parietal cortex, like us humans. Now this is interesting, because as this mirror neurons are a special class of neurons that activate both when an individual performs an action. So if I'm writing if I'm writing my name, let's say on a piece of paper, the mirror neurons are getting activated. But if I see someone else writing my name on the mirror, or especially the action that they are taking to write on a piece of paper, even that is activating my mirror neurons, which kind of again is similar in case with chimpanzees. So if an individual performs an action and if an individual observes someone else performing the similar action, these neurons they light up for chimpanzees as well. Now, therefore, these neurons respond both when a chimp performs an action and when it observes the same action. Therefore, it kind of suggests that the neural underpinnings for probably empathy and action understanding is also there in chimps. In fact, a 2016 study published in the journal Science, I think it was led by Christopher Krupinier, if I didn't pronounce the name wrong, from Duke University, showed that chimpanzees demonstrate mirror-like neural activity and perspective taking in observational tasks, which then again implies that great apes share the basic mechanisms of empathy with humans. Okay, now let's talk about locomotion. Chimpanzees are highly flexible locomotors. On ground, they are characteristically moving by knuckle walking, and while doing so, they support their body on the dorsal surface of the middle finger phalanges. Anatomically, studies note that the third and the fourth metacarpal are in chimps are especially robust to withstanding compression forces during knuckle walking. So when they're knuckle walking, most of the pressure is on the third and the fourth metacarpal, or third and fourth. No, it's third and fourth. Yeah, these two metacarpals, and most of the pressure compression is on them. Yet they are robust enough to withstand those pressures. And their finger bones are curved, unlike us, which are we have the ability to make them straight. They are curved, and which is again useful for gripping trees and the branches while they are brachiating, which basically means that they're swinging from one tree branch to another, anything like that. Okay, chimps also regularly climb and like I told, brachiate in trees. By brachiate, I basically mean swing from one tree branch to another using their powerful arms and the flexible shoulder. Now, although not habitually bipedal, that is walk on just two limbs like us, it's seen that chimps can walk on short distances upright, and especially when carrying objects on their legs, or the limbs, the lower limbs. Okay, now let us talk about, or let us move on to the behavioral aspect and the social structure of chimps. Chimpanzees live in a fission and fusion community. Well, what is that? Like, what is fission and fusion? So fission and fusion communities are basically social groups that exhibit dynamic changes in their size and composition. So they split, which is fission, into smaller subgroups for certain activities, and then again merge together, which is again fusion, at other times. So a pan community may contain several dozens of individuals, often ranging from like 20 to 100, but it rarely travels as one cohesive group. Instead, individuals split into subgroups that change composition from one day to the next day, and this flexibility kind of helps chimps cope with fluctuating food resources and social dynamics in general. Now, the social structure is again sex biased, which with males being philopatric. That means that males remain in their natal community, whereas most females disperse to the neighboring groups at adolescence. But why don't males move out? In felids, males move out and females stay. Why not in hominids? Well, male philopatry fosters kind of strong male-male bonds, which while female dispersal kind of reduces in breeding. Within communities, again, males form coalitions as well, and they patrol the territory boundaries together after doing so. Whereas each, dispersing female must kind of negotiate their entry into a new group. And it is very different from how felids function. But then again, group felid dynamic is different from solitary felid dynamic, and we can have another episode related to this. But then again, for chimps, this is the case. Males are philopatric, whereas females are dispersing. The typical mating system again is therefore again promiscuous, because the social structure, it doesn't how they function, their behavior doesn't permit what's the word for monogamous? Yeah, so they cannot be monogamous, so they are promiscuous. That is, one male may mate with others, females, and vice versa, which again results in paternity often being uncertain, which is kind of expected, which then again further shapes the social interactions. So now let's talk about the dominance hierarchies that exist for chimps. Both male and female chimps form dominance ranking, though male hierarchies tend to be kind of overt. Adult males compete very fiercely for status, and the most dominant males, i.e. the alpha male, gain priority access to resource, mating opportunities, and the support of allies. Males usually groom each other and kind of form alliances, and by groom what I mean is that they take the ticks off each other's body and all that stuff. So I'll just put up a video for you here. That's grooming. Okay, where was that? Yeah, grooming. So, like, in other words, when they form these alliances, they can basically be termed as coalition, and they use this coalition to challenge rivals and to defend territory. Observation studies report that male chimpanzees frequently use cooperation, such as male grooming each other extensively and forming temporary collisions as well that enhance their dominance rank or assist in group defense. In fact, these coalitions can help an ambitious male even overtake an alpha or guard his position against other challengers. So you can see how it is so fascinating how this groups of chimpanzees, how the pan genus in general is so similar in how they behave compared to us humans. Not same, we are worse. In my opinion, we are worse. Okay, jokes aside, however, it needs to be noted that after these conflicts, unlike us, males often reconcile with their allies. In fact, male diet exhibit higher rates of post-conflict reconciliation than females. Now, this really makes me revere on how similar chimps are to us, and how similar we are to chimps. Coming to females, female dominance is more subtle. They are unlike the males. They don't overtly show that one is dominant to other. While again, like, some long-term communities exhibit clear ranking females, often the oldest or the largest is the more dominant one. Dominance interaction among females are less frequent and harder to observe. Chimpanzee researchers note that females do not overtly vie for status, as unlike males. However, high-ranking females often enjoy privileges, such as feeding priority and better mating prospects, that can again overall affect the reproductive success. For example, dominant males in Gombe showed more stable body weight and a higher offspring survival than subordinate females. In essence, female rank matters. Though female chimps do not usually fight openly, top-ranking females tend to have better access to food and to transmit advantages to their infants. So that again has kind of an evolutionary benefit to it. All right. Okay, so now let's talk about cognition and communication. Chimpanzees are renowned for sophisticated tool use and cultural variation, and I'm pretty sure you have seen videos all across the internet of chimps using tools, especially the observation studies done by Jane Goodall, the pioneer in behavioral studies of chimpanzees. Anyway, across Africa, different chimp communities use tools in kind of unique ways. This phenomena is also called chimp culture. Classic examples include termite fishing, where chimps use sticks to fish termites or ants out. And then there's also nut cracking, where hammer and anvil stones are used to crack nuts. Then there is leaf sponging, where chimps use folded leaves to soak up water. And then there is probe fishing for resources such as honey. Systematic surveys have documented dozens of behavioral relations. One comprehensive study, and that's on my screen, identified at least 39 distinct behaviors that vary culturally among chimp populations, of which many involve tool use. So one population is different from another, and how they use their tools is different from each other. And it's not just about the tool use. It also involves other social and grooming customs. So one group might groom their individuals in a different way compared to other, or they might groom in a social class. They might groom certain individuals more than other, and it differs between the populations. For example, just to give you an example, let me think. Nut cracking. I think in East Africa, if I'm not wrong, East African chimps habitually crack nuts with stones. However, this behavior is kind of absent in some regions. So that kind of really puts into emphasis how different population contributes in a different way, and why it is important to look at conservation on a population scale. Although landscape level conservation is required, however, when it comes to certain behaviors like this, which is documented behavior that is different across population, that kind of lays the importance to conserve these chimp population on a population level as well. Anyway, and from compared to these Eastern African chimps, West African chimps are famously specialized famous for specialized fishing probes for dry runs. These kind of localized customs are also transmitted socially, where young chimps learn by observing and imitating their mothers and group mates. In captivity and in the wild, chimpanzees usually adopt new skills demonstrated by others, even when they could not invent the solutions alone. So by that, what I mean is that this trait, like how we learn to speak, right? How we learn to walk, how we learn to talk, how we learn to use R and code. Most of it is learned in a way that is done by others, right? We kind of like Newton's special tool, building on the shoulders of giants. That really matters, because if you are seeing something and then you're learning, and then you can really innovate on it. And in a similar way, that's what's happening with chimps as well. And I'll talk about this later. I have this entire small case study that I'll talk about, where it's shown that, or it's seen that this trait learning, the skill learning, is kind of matrilineal. Anyway, a very recent 2024 study shows that chimpanzees, and I'll make sure that I have all the citations on the description of the podcast, or show note captions, and also on the screen for you guys to verify and read more about. But this 2024 study showed that chimpanzees learned a novel puzzle box task only via social demonstration, where individual chimpanzees where certain individual chimpanzees were failing to innovate individually, kind of succeeded in that box puzzle experiment once shown by a conspecific, which again drives home the point that you can learn by looking at others and then innovate on it. Now, findings like this kind of again indicate that chimpanzees can exhibit individual innovation. Their cultural traditions often depend on imitation and teaching. Additionally, chimps combine and modify and sometimes even share tools. For instance, mothers have been filmed in Congo actively teaching termite fishing by handing specialized probes to their infants, and like I told, it's matrilineal. This learning is matrilineal, which again is important. Like, in a nutshell, no pun intended, chimpanzees possess one of the richest non-human tool repertoires ever known, and they maintain a distinct technologies that persist kind of across generations. Now let us talk about problem solving and theory of mind. Chimps are keen problem solvers and show elements of complex social cognition. They can plan and use insights when retrieving food or using tools, and they even adapt their strategies to new situations. For example, inventing new ways to release inaccessible fruit. Okay, before we delve deeper into chimp in relation to theory of mind, let us understand what it is. Let us understand what is theory of mind. Theory of mind is basically, to put it very succinctly in a very plain words, the cognitive ability to understand that others have their own thoughts. They have their own thoughts, they have their own beliefs, desires, and intentions. Now, researchers have probed whether chimps understand others' mental states, i.e., the theory of mind. While chimps generally struggle with classic, this false belief task, unlike adult humans, eye tracking experiments reveal that apes can anticipate another's action based on what that individual has seen or believes. In the same 2016 Nature study that we kind of discussed earlier, it was found that using anticipatory looking great apes, which are chimpanzees, bonobos, orangutans, showed gaze patterns indicating they expected a human actor to search where he believed an object was, even when that belief was false. And this again suggests that chimps, like other apes, have some implicit understanding of others' beliefs or knowledge, at least in a spontaneous non-verbal context. Overall, cognitive abilities approach those of human children on many tasks. For example, chimps are good at perspective taking, which is knowing what others can or cannot see, and then there is cooperative problem solving and understanding goals. Although they perform below adult human levels on causal reasoning and a certain abstract tasks, but they routinely outperform most other species in tool-related intelligence and social strategy. Now, coming to vocalization and gestures, chimpanzees communicate using a very rich repertoire of vocal calls. Then there are also facial expression and gestures, and many of which are intentional. Their repertoire includes loud, distant calls, which are pant hoots, screams, something like this. And then there are alarm calls to alert other dangers, something like this. And then there are food calls, which are basically soft grunts or raspberries when eating desired food. There are also again many nuanced vocal signals. For example, rough grunts produced during feeding have been shown to experimentally function like referential signals. So playback of these distinct grunt types, which is again associated with different foods, cause the listener to search for a specific area for this particular food. Now, this again indicate that chimps not only produce acoustically distinct calls for different food, but also understand them kind of meaningfully. Like it's like their own language. I wonder if they understand sarcasm. Anyway, some thoughts you shouldn't speak out even in a podcast. All right. Gesturally, chimps use dozens of distinct gestures, and they use it intentionally, such as hand clasps, arm reaches, or other this head nod to request action from others. For instance, there are this different gestures from others that say kind of groom me, give me food, come here, etc. I'm not. By the way, I'm not doing these gestures. it's just that it just comes so naturally, Unlike the primate vocal tract, the chimpanzee vocal system has kind of limited ability to vocal learning, but their gestures and many calls are flexible and used with apparent intent. Chimps also engage in vocal exchanges. A group of males may pant, hoot, and chorus as a kind of a rallying display. Basically, in summary, pan communication is multimodal system with referential context calls often convey specific information about identity or context, and gestures are again used intentionally to get the desired response. Right. Okay. Moving into the ecology and diet of chimps. So chimps occupy a wide range of habitats. Their distribution spans from Sudan, Guinea, the region in north, down to the Congo Basin, covering parts of countries like Guinea, Nigeria, Cameroon, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm proud that I remember all these names. I always get confused with African, sub-Saharan African countries' names. Anyway, they inhabited, chimps inhabit tropical rainforests, swamp forests, and forest savanna mosaics as well. Chimps are usually absent from open deserts and high mountains, but they can exploit mountain forests for up to 2,500 meter elevation. Within protected areas like Tai National Park, which is in Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, Gabonese forest, East African reserves as well. Like they occupy both continuous forests and also fragmented landscapes. Importantly, their use of habitat is fusion like we discussed earlier, and subgroups may forage widely and traverse kind of mixed terrains. Now, the diet of chimpanzee is omnivorous with frugivorous bias, i.e., preference for fruits. On average, fruits, especially like figs and fleshy fruits, compose about 50 to 70% of the diet, and then again supplemented with leaves, seeds, bark, and pith. Insect prey, particularly termites, ants, and caterpillars, are regularly eaten, which are again often obtained with tools like we discussed earlier. However, chimps are also consume honey, egg, mushroom, sometimes soil or clay, which is basic geophagy for minerals. Crucially, chimps also hunt vertebrates on occasion, where they cooperatively prey on monkeys, like red colobus monkeys, and sometimes even pigs and duikers. So let me play a video of that. It's a bit of a graphic video, so if you don't want to watch a video, please skip ahead. But yeah, so have a look. That was something. Where were we? Yes, hunting. Hunting rates, like again, vary by community and sex, where adult males do most of the hunting and then share the meat with other group members. Additionally, the dietary composition kind of fluctuates seasonally. During this fruit shortages, chimps rely more on fallback foods like leaves or nuts, whereas in peak fruit season they spend more time eating ripe fruits. This dietary flexibility using both plants and animal resources kind of helps sustain chimp communities year round. It is to be noted, however, that chimps in different regions showed geographic diet variation. Even when the same food species are available, one community may use it and the another not, which again reflects the cultural differences with respect to feeding preferences. Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's what happens when you are new to recording all this stuff, recording a podcast. I was blabbering on about food and the diet of chimpanzees, and my battery had died. I didn't realize that. Okay, anyway, I think I have discussed most of the things required about food. What I want to now move on to is the home range and territoriality of chimpanzees. Like chimpanzee communities usually occupy overlapping home ranges. The range size varies kind of widely as and it varies mostly as a function of habitat and group size, i.e. in dense forest, communities use as little as 5 to 50 kilometers square, often which is like 10 to 20 kilometers square. It mostly falls in 10 to 20 kilometer square range, but however there has been documentation of 50 kilometer square in kind of deciduous dense forest. However, when we talk about savanna or the woodland, or for larger groups, ranges can exceed up to 100 kilometers square, and there has been documentation of about 500 kilometers square as well. Within these ranges, males and females use space differently. Males often patrol and travel the full extent of the territory, while females tend to have smaller core areas and travel less, except in estrus or consortship. Yeah, I think it's called consortship. Basically, when do you want to mate, or at least when there's a season to mate, or when there's the viable resources to mate, have a chimp kid and everything. Okay, now territorial behavior is quite notable. Males at range edges will pursue and sometimes even attack members of neighboring communities. In fact, unlike many other animals that simply chase intruders away, chimps may launch organized raids where coalition of males stealthily enter a neighboring range and then isolate, threaten, or even kill lone outsiders. Thus, even though adjacent ranges often overlap at or abut at forest edges, home ranges are kind of defended and partly exclusive. Transgressors would be shot, or trespassers would be shot, something like that, something similar to that. And these spatial and territorial dynamics have again critical conservation implications, and it kind of lays forward the importance of protecting corridors and preventing intergroup conflict for population stability. Now let's discuss the conservation status and threats related to chimpanzees. Both chimpanzee species are threatened by both chimpanzee species. What I mean is the common chimpanzee and the other pan species, which is bonobos. Sorry, just getting on my head. The IUCN Red List classifies the common chimpanzee troglodytes as endangered. And let me just have a look. And yeah, and the bonobo paniscus is also classified as endangered by the IUCN. Wild chimpanzees, like, actually let me, I think there is one, just let me have a look. I think, yeah. So notably, the western subspecies, which is troglodytes virus, which is kind of a subspecies, is in fact critically endangered due to extreme recent declines. While chimpanzee populations have kind of declined sharply in recent decades in most part, but in the western part there is more decline compared to the eastern part. The major reasons include habitat loss, fragmentation due to agriculture, logging, mining, infrastructure. Then there are also bushmeat hunting, where local people hunt chimps for meat and capture infants for pet trade, and that's finally disease. For example, Ebola virus is extraordinarily lethal to apes. Field data suggests mortality rates of about 77% in infected chimp groups, and repeated Ebola outbreaks have killed an estimated of I think one third of the remaining gorillas and chimps in affected regions. Other diseases, example respiratory viruses, can also decimate small groups, especially small group actually, especially where humans encroach, because we can transmit disease to them, not only other animals, zoonotic disease. It's not about that. Anyway, additionally, human induced forest fragmentation increases all these risks by isolating groups and bringing chimps into contact with poachers. In sum, without conservation intervention, chimpanzee numbers are projected to continue plunging. In fact, a review recently warned that the next decade will see our closest relatives pushed to the brink of extinction unless action is taken. And I'll put the citation in up here for you to read more about this review. Excellent review, though. Okay. Conservation efforts are again multi-pronged. Protected areas are in most cases a kind of a cornerstone, with many chimp communities now living in national parks and and in reserves. Example, in Thai National Park in Ivory Coast, Gombe, Mahale, in Tanzania, Nuabale Nduku. I think I'm going to massacre the pronunciation here, but if I'm not wrong, it's pronounced as Nuabale Ndoki in Congo, have really good populations of chimpanzees, and they're effectively conserving them. And effective management of these areas, which includes also anti-poaching law enforcement, can stabilize or even increase local chimp numbers. For instance, intensive patrol in Thai National Park in Ivory Coast has led to the stabilization of chimp population and other mammal population as well. So there's not, when you conserve a certain species, it's not just limited to that species. It kind of precipitates and diffuses to other species as well, especially when that species is umbrella species. I'm not sure if chimps are umbrella species, but definitely when you conserve a forest and you conserve many other species. In addition, non-governmental organizations running community-based monitoring and anti-poaching units are also crucial to help protect chimp populations. One such success story is the dramatic reduction in snaring and poaching in parts of Thai forest after sustained ranger patrolling has kind of allowed chimp sightings to again rebound. Disease surveillance and mitigation is another, such as vaccination, research, funding, and then again quarantine protocols for research chimps, and all these are also emerging strategies. And what else is there? In addition to that, I think some range countries have also implemented bushmeat bans and promoted alternative livelihood to reduce hunting pressure. Overall, the integration of local communities by means of education and benefit sharing scientific monitoring and strong law enforcement is, it is the best practice when it comes to chimp conservation. In addition, cross-disciplinary research has also contributed to the conservation. For example, genetic studies collected from the fecal samples help estimate population size and connectivity, thereby can guide where to focus corridors or reserves. Now, it might all seem dark and gloomy, but despite these severe threats, there are encouraging signs that well-funded science-based evidence, such as research such as wildlife conservation societies works in Nuabale, Nadoki, and Lincoln Park Zoo, and the support of all this has really helped the Gorango Triangle project, and has had positive outcomes for chimpanzees. Now, speaking of the techniques used to study wild animal, contains a blend of field techniques and modern technology. Behavior observation remain kind of foundational, where researchers conduct focal follows, which is continuous observation of one individual for a set amount of time. And then there is also scan sampling, where there are periodic checks of all animal activities. And then there is ad libitum recording of rare events. Then there are also non-invasive genetics, which has revolutionized population monitoring. In this method, researchers collect fecal samples to obtain chimp DNA to identify individuals, estimate their population size, and assess kinship without even capturing the animal. For example, the microsatellite and the genomic analysis of chimp feces reveal migration patterns and effective population sizes. Then there are also GPS and GIS tools that are now widely used. Here chimps may be fitted with a non-harmful GPS collar, or researchers follow known chimps with GPS linked tablets to their tracking range to track their ranging patterns. Bioacoustic is also increasingly becoming important. And what happens here is that this microphone arrays and automated recorders can monitor chimp vocal activity to kind of detect presence as well as behavior. For example, frequent panthoots may indicate group movement or even alarm calls. And then there are also camera traps and drones. These motion sensitive cameras in forests can capture images or videos of unhabituated chimps, while drone provides aerial survey of difficult terrain and help detect poaching signs. Now, recently also artificial intelligence and machine learning have begun to aid researchers as well. For instance, computer vision algorithms are being developed to recognize individual chimps by their facial features or to identify specific behaviors, like nut cracking in video footage. Therefore, these kind of technological advances combined with long-term field data give conservationists a powerful toolkit to study chimp ecology and then again respond rapidly to newly developing threats to chimp populations. Okay, now while researching for this episode, like I mentioned earlier, I really went into a rabbit hole of reading more about their tool use, the culture of chimp, in general the tool use culture of chimps. So I want to talk about a very small case study for about like a small time. I just want to talk about this case study. In the I think I'm gonna massacre the pronunciation again, but sorry about that. The Goa Logo, I think it's called Goa Logo Triangle, basically in the Congo Basin, is an exceptional kind of field site for chimpanzee tool research. Chimpanzees there employ an extraordinary rich and versatile set of tools. Detailed studies like such Sands and Morgan in 2007 and Sands and colleagues in 2013 show Goa Logo chimps using at least 9 different tools, 9 different types of tools for termite fishing alone. And then there are also additional tools for nut cracking and honey gathering. And if you remember, towards the beginning of the podcast, I really spoke about how this skill of using tools is matrilineal, and that's what I want to talk about in this case study as well. That these tools used are also kind of again passed down in generations. However, in practice, chimp families in Gualongo pass these techniques mostly matrilineally, i.e. the mothers teach offsprings by example and even by tool sharing. So video analyses and direct observations have confirmed that mothers actively hand their specialized termite probes to their young, effectively teaching them the correct tool materials and and the construction, like how to use the tool, how to construct it, and all that stuff. Okay. Additionally, different chimp communities use nearby different nut cracking methods. For example, one group uses heavy stone hammers on side anvils, while another use lighter kind of tools on foot pounded anvils. Moreover, these variant, not variant, how is it called this? These different techniques are learned within the group, and kind of it's just not copied across neighbors. So the Goalogo case thus kind of illustrates accumulative culture in chimps, and these kind of insights have conservation implications as well. Recognizing that such knowledge is locally held means that if a population is lost, with it is also lost a unique cultural heritage, that is tool tradition. And it also means that rehabilitation and translocation effort must account for this cultural learning. As rehabilitating chimps without a teacher may even fail to thrive without any targeted education. Okay, up until now we discussed a lot of information related to chimps, so let us synthesize all of this and conclude this episode. First thing, you might have deciphered from all this talk is that chimpanzee research today is highly multidisciplinary. It combines genomics, neurobiology, ethology, ecology, and anthropology. For instance, genomic studies, that is chimpanzee and bonobo genome sequences, link genetic variations to behavioral traits, while anthropologists integrate chimp data to model human evolution. Additionally, conservationists also use behavioral ecology to design protected areas that match chimp social systems. Additionally, there are questions that perhaps future research will reveal answers to. Questions like, how complex is chimpanzee culture? Can it ever, resemble cumulative cultural evolution as seen in humans? Do chimp communications have precursors of grammar? What are the the neural and the genetic basis of their intelligence? And understanding chimp minds could perhaps even illuminate the origins of human language and empathy. Who knows? Finally, there is also there is a conservation imperative tied to chimp behavior as well. Knowing that chimps rely on social learning for survival skills underlines the need to keep family groups intact and not orphan juveniles in the wild. Understanding male territoriality, female dispersal helps again shape wildlife corridor policies. In essence, behavioral conservation means using knowledge of chimp social life to inform management. For example, we know interrupting migrating females transfer to a new community may have genetic and social consequences for both groups. Similarly, learning that chimps respond strongly to calls means that acoustic surveys can monitor population even non-invasively. Finally, chimpanzees are our closest relatives and carry invaluable, invaluable natural and cultural heritage. Continued support for conservation NGOs, primatological research, and habitat protection is therefore critical. By reducing deforestation, controlling bushmeat trade, and funding science-based management, including disease monitoring, we can help ensure that chimpanzees and this rich social behavior they exhibit persist in the wild for generations to come. So with that being said, I will see you in the next episode of EcoRap Podcast, and happy World Chimpanzee Day.